Brazilian Ruben Alves tells a story of a boy who found the body of a dead man washed up on the edge of a seaside village. There is only one thing to do with the dead. They must be buried. In that village, it was the custom for the women to prepare the dead for burial. So the women began to clean the body in preparation for the funeral. As they did, the women began to talk and ponder about the dead stranger. He was tall and would have had to duck his head to enter their houses. His voice, was it like a whisper or like thunder? His hands, they were big. Did they play with children or sail the seas or know how to caress and embrace a woman's body? The women laughed and were surprised as they realized that the funeral had become a resurrection, a moment in their flesh, dreams long believed to be dead, returning, their bodies alive again. The husbands, waiting outside and watching what was happening, became jealous of the drowned man as they realized he had power which they did not have. And they thought about the dreams they had never had. Alvis ends this part of the story by telling that they finally buried the dead man. But the village was never the same again. This story captures for me what resurrection is all about. It's not about bringing the dead back to life. Rather, it's about bringing the living back to life. It is about the reviving of past dreams. It is about dreaming of new possibilities. Ultimately, it is about transformation, not just of ourselves, but of the whole community. I began with this unfamiliar resurrection story because we've stopped listening to the one we read every year on this Sunday, on this first Sunday following Easter Day. As soon as we hear the first line, that the disciples are in a locked room when Jesus came to them and said, "Peace be with you," we think, oh yes, doubting Thomas. We then jump to the end of the story, cutting short the opportunity to be transformed. It's a shame because John is a marvelous storyteller. We will hear 4 of his stories during the Easter season, and into each he packs a lot. John's gospel focuses on mystery, and stories are an especially good means of conveying the inexplicable. However, as soon as we turn them into historical accounts, they lose their sparkle. They are about as interesting as yesterday's paper. They become about the characters and not about us, and we stop listening. But a good story we will listen to over and over. When this story was written, it was about 70 years after the crucifixion. Few who witnessed it, if any, were still around. That didn't matter because John wasn't addressing the church. John was addressing the church in his day about its issues. What makes a good story good is when it addresses aspects of our present life. John is not telling a story about Thomas. He's telling a story about us. It is also about our relationship to one another and the source of all life. It's not a story about a dead Jesus coming back to life. It's a story about us, the living, coming back to life. It's not about how a dead Jesus got into a locked room. It's about how God gets us out of whatever room we've locked ourselves into. It's a mystery story about how to revive our dead dreams and dream new ones we never had. Sometimes it helps to hear a familiar story from a different perspective. I wonder how Thomas might tell it. The disciples and I have had a very bad week, about as bad a week as a week can get. Just as Jesus had warned us after raising Lazarus, the powers of domination and their handmaidens in the temple were none too happy about our visit to Jerusalem. Boy, Jesus stirred them up. He took the mickey out of the emperor and priests. He was fearless. It was quite heady to watch. The people were really getting behind him. I think he just had to say the word, and Rome would have had a serious insurrection on their hands. At least, I hope so. It was just what I and the rest of the guys had dreamed would happen. Then he holds what he said would be his last meal with us. It wasn't the most lighthearted meal we ever had together. During it, he tells us that one of us will betray him to the authorities. That shook us. Before we could fully absorb that he tells us we will deny and then desert him. Afterwards, he doesn't say, rise up against Rome. He says, kneel down to serve, and then showed us how. After his arrest, sure enough, we can't wait to deny him fast enough to save our precious skins. We watch his trial from the distance, and when he was condemned to death, we took off for home in a flash. We were terrified they would come after us. We were in hiding. We were frightened. We were ashamed. We were confused. We were sure Yahweh had anointed Jesus, and for his part, he spoke of Yahweh as a loving son, might to his doting parent. Yet Scripture tells us God cursed him. The law says when someone is convicted of a crime punishable by death and is executed, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse must not remain all night upon the tree. You shall bury him that same day. For anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. We tried to make sense of these events as we jumped at every noise we heard outside the door. I couldn't take it anymore and went out for a walk with the hood of my cloak covering my face. I just wanted to weep in private. My desolation was complete. Did I just waste the last 3 years of my life? What do we have to show for it? What changed? When I got back, everyone was in a very different place than when I left. They told me that they had spent the time talking about what they had loved about Jesus. They retold his riddles he called parables that we are still pondering what he was going on about. They laughed at how he tweaked the noses of the pious and the self-righteous. They marveled at how cool he was when the soldiers came to arrest him. They remembered how he told us to drop our swords and then chided the chief priest's henchmen for how brave they are arresting him in the dark when they could have done so at any time during the day. They remembered with awe his dignity when he was mocked. And then they told me the impossible. They swore that suddenly it was like he was in the room. We felt his peace. They swore. And then they were at peace. While it was clear something had changed, I scoffed. I think my exact word was, Codswallop. I don't care what they felt. There's no denying violence had won the day again. He was dead. The dream was dead. I had no doubt. They were eager to go out on the street and continue Jesus' ministry. And I told them, go ahead. Get crucified with him. Nothing will change.